If you've ever picked up a Super Smash Bros. Game and thought to yourself, hey, this Marth guy is pretty cool, I wonder what his games are like. Or when taking a look at the Fire Emblem series for the first time, you've ever asked the question, is blank in this game? Then this video is definitely for you. Stevie here with Lucky Crit, and today for those of you familiar with the Fire Emblem franchise, who know all the protagonists throughout the series, and who already have a basic understanding of each game, you might not get all that much from this video, though you can definitely stick around for the pretty visuals, or perhaps it could serve as a good refresher if you're not completely familiar with each entry in the series. Hopefully this video will help newer fans to understand which titles that they can pick up to experience the stories with the characters that they're looking for. To start things off, I think it's important that anyone new note that Fire Emblem didn't hit Western shores until the widespread appeal of Marth and Roy after appearing in Super Smash Bros. Originally, Nintendo didn't think that RPGs like Fire Emblem would be very popular for Western audiences, and you can learn more about that in our Advance Wars video here, but once they finally gave us a chance, we really proved them incredibly wrong, and in some cases we've made a lot of games even more successful here than they were in Japan, so clearly we like this stuff a lot. Because of this initial hesitation though on Nintendo's part, we didn't get a Fire Emblem game until the 7th game in the series, Fire Emblem Rekka no Ken, also known as the Blazing Sword. And of course, like many other game series localized for the first time, in order to avoid any confusion for new players in the West, there was no acknowledgement that it was the 7th game in the series, nor was it even given a subtitle, so it's just called Fire Emblem. I guess it makes sense, as usually when you're out at a store checking out a brand new game, and you realize it's a numbered sequel in a series that you've never played before, there's generally a feeling of, oh, I might not be able to get into this if I haven't played the first one. And what if I don't understand what's going on? And the fact that it was the 7th game out of nowhere could have definitely seemed a little bit intimidating to consumers. Thankfully though, most Fire Emblem games don't really require any knowledge of other games in the series to be able to play and enjoy, so you don't really have to worry about that at all. And while their reasoning for leaving out the subtitle was sound and they wanted to appeal to as many potential new fans as possible, it also lent to a very confusing titling for this entry in the series, with it just being named Fire Emblem. So just keep in mind that anything before Fire Emblem 7 for the Game Boy Advance, this one, was never officially released here in the West. Before we get into talking about the main Fire Emblem games though, I do want to discuss Fire Emblem Heroes briefly, as it is easily the most accessible Fire Emblem game to date, and serves as honestly a really great starting point for anyone looking to dip their toe into the Fire Emblem series or wanting to try it out. It's a free mobile game that you can play on any smartphone running iOS or Android, and it has all of the characters that you may be looking for as a new player who's familiar with Super Smash Bros., and it's simply just a few taps away from your preferred app store. While it is a little bit more of a watered-down Fire Emblem experience when compared to the main games, there's definitely still a lot of depth here for you to learn and experience, and it continues to have even more depth added each and every month with the major app updates. You can take it as casually or as hardcore as you want and still find a fun and enjoyable time with it, so definitely check it out if you're wondering what this Fire Emblem stuff is all about and want to have a taste to see if you like it. And the best part is that there's no permadeath here, so you don't have to worry about losing any characters. Though I would suggest if you're just looking to get the characters that you know already, like Marth, Roy, Ike, and so on, definitely make sure that they are the focus of the summon banners when you go to summon, as otherwise it's going to be pretty hard to get them right off the bat. The characters pictured in each banner have increased odds, so you can save your orbs for when you see them in the banners. But overall, it's a great way to familiarize yourself with the other characters in the series that you may just grow to love through some new experiences in Heroes. And you can also re-roll your account by completely deleting the app without linking a My Nintendo account, and then just re-downloading it and playing through the short prologue chapters again, and summoning once more if you're not happy with those first few batches of characters that you get. With all that said though, let's now take a look at the main series Fire Emblem games, the games that started it all. Let's start at the very beginning, shall we? Marth is the original Fire Emblem protagonist, appearing as the main character in 4 of the main series Fire Emblem games. The first 2 of these games being Fire Emblem 1, Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light for the NES, and its sequel Fire Emblem 3, Mystery of the Emblem, which served as sort of a book 2 for Marth's story. Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light, the first ever Fire Emblem game, was a turn-based tactical role-playing game featuring many fantasy classes, linear story progression moving from map to map, level ups, character promotion, and permanent death when characters died in battle. Victory was achieved when an enemy base was captured or all enemies were defeated. Fire Emblem 3, Mystery of the Emblem, served as both a remake of the original, bringing it up to snuff for the Super Famicom, while also providing a book 2 for Marth's story. Characters can now have support bonuses from fighting nearby each other, mounted units were able to actually dismount and be able to navigate certain terrain types better, and so on. Both of these games were never released in the West, and although you can emulate them with some English translation patches that are out there, I would ultimately have to recommend that if you do want to play these games, that you play their Nintendo DS remakes, as they're not only better graphically, but they also have deeper plots, much better written dialogue, extra guidance chapters, a player-created character unit in Fire Emblem 12, more difficulty options, and much more. Fire Emblem 2, known as Fire Emblem Gaiden, literally meaning Fire Emblem Side Story, follows a pretty interesting Nintendo trend back in the day, with them trying some strange and out-of-the-box innovative new mechanics to follow up on their successful original titles. This resulted in sequels like Zelda 2 that were massively different than the originals. Fire Emblem Gaiden featured many differences from its predecessor Fire Emblem 1, a few being a traversable world map, controlling 2 different armies simultaneously throughout the game, battling monsters alongside the enemy soldiers, magic costing HP, third-tier character promotions, and so on. This earned Fire Emblem Gaiden the title of the black sheep of the franchise for being such a different experience, although we have seen some of its experimental additions to the formula return in later entries in the series, which I'll bring up later. The game starred dual protagonists Alm and Celica on a continent right across the sea from Archayanami, where Marth's games took place, so we're still in the same world. We've also received a remake of this game very recently, but of course that comes later, so we'll get there in a little bit. Fire Emblem 4, Genealogy of the Holy War for the Super Famicom, was the next entry in the series, starring protagonist Sigurd, and it was the first game in the series to introduce child characters, with his son Seliph front and center. Genealogy also brought many differences and innovations to the series, first and foremost being character pairing, which provides you with children units later in the game, the famous Fire Emblem weapon triangle system of swords beating axes, axes beating lances, and lances beating swords, a home castle system, weapon repairing, very massive maps requiring more of a reliance on mounted units, castle guarding, a leadership system granting extra hit and avoid to units, skills for the first time in the series, and various other differences. Fire Emblem 5, Thracia 776, was also for the Super Famicom, and was sort of a midquel for Genealogy, occurring between some of its major events. This game featured Leaf as the main protagonist, with a very noticeable increase in difficulty level, extra chapters called Gaiden chapters that were unlocked by fulfilling certain conditions, a fatigue system, fog of war maps, rescuing, more usable axes, playable dark mages, and so on. Genealogy and Thracia are some of the more difficult entries in the series to play, as of course we never got them to begin with here in the West, and they haven't been remade yet, nor are they a part of any Nintendo Virtual Console libraries outside of Japan, so you'll definitely have to emulate these games if you want to play them. Starting off with the GBA era of Fire Emblem games was Fire Emblem 6, Fuin no Tsurugi, known as Fire Emblem the Binding Blade. This game featured Roy as the main character, and once again, while there are fan translations and even some fake fan-made cartridges floating around out there, we never officially got to experience Roy's story here in the West. This game is the first in the series to really give us the more modern Fire Emblem experience, with it essentially basing its foundation off of the established mechanics in Thracia 776 and expanding upon them. Foregoing the skills and fatigue system of some of the previous games, instead this game focuses more upon character growths, bases, and their equipped items. It also brought a Link Arena, trial maps. It was the first game to introduce different levels for the support conversations ranging from C to A, character affinities, and had a more expanded magic system with light, dark, and anima magic being given their own weapon triangle that continued throughout all of the Game Boy Advance Fire Emblem games that many fans, including myself, really enjoyed and appreciated. There were also branching story path routes, and of course, how could I not mention it, it was also the beginning of the incredibly beautiful and essentially universally loved Fire Emblem Game Boy Advance animation style, with its crazy, over-the-top battle animations and critical hit flourishes. They should totally remake this game so we could play it. This brings us to Fire Emblem The Blazing Blade, Fire Emblem 7, and the first Fire Emblem game that we got here in America. This game serves as a prequel to Fire Emblem 6, starring Eliwood, Lyn, and Hector, Eliwood being Roy's father. This game didn't really offer too much different than its predecessor, aside from being much easier difficulty-wise, but it also introduced a tactician player character that served as sort of the basis for the future avatars and player-created characters, though this one served a much more minor role in the story. It also brought new weather conditions like rain or snow that affected movement on maps, different storylines for different characters, with Lyn's story serving as the prologue chapters and Hector's story modes being unlocked after beating Eliwood's story. And it also featured a support viewer to be able to rewatch your unlocked support conversations between characters. Due to it being the first game that we ever got in the West, it served as many of our first Fire Emblem experiences, and with its Lyn prologue chapters, it has a very excellent tutorial for new players of the series. It's also available to purchase on the Wii U Virtual Console, so that's another great way to play it if you have a Wii U. Next we got Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones, or Fire Emblem 8, also on the Game Boy Advance, and this game featured dual protagonists Ephraim and Erica. It was sort of a spiritual successor to Fire Emblem Gaiden, and thus had some familiar mechanics and features that were present in Gaiden. It featured new branch promotions which allowed characters to be upgraded into 2 different class lines, trainee units that started off incredibly weak but had incredible potential, the return of the Fire Emblem Gaiden style world map with monsters lurking about and skirmishes against them, a branch storyline where you could either choose Erica's route or Ephraim's route, which resulted in a different story progression and different maps, class-specific skills, as well as a post-game creature campaign, where even after beating the story, you could continue to roam the world map and test your army against challenging dungeons. Fire Emblem 8, The Sacred Stones, is also available on both the Wii U and Nintendo 3DS Virtual Consoles, but the 3DS version is only available to members of the Nintendo 3DS Ambassador Program, which is a program that Nintendo launched for players who bought the 3DS early on, when it was much more expensive at its original price point before its major price cut. It allowed those players who were essentially early adopters to have 10 free NES games and 10 free GBA games, which happened to include the Sacred Stones. But then they also never went back and made it purchasable to anybody else. So unfortunately, this one isn't really accessible on the 3DS for everyone, but it's still possible to emulate the game or purchase the original Game Boy Advance cartridge online, though it may not be as cheap as you might have originally thought. Following this, the series jumped ever forward into the world of 3D for the first time with Fire Emblem Path of Radiance for the GameCube, or FE9. This game introduced us to Ike and the Grail mercenaries, as well as popular villains like the Black Knight. It featured many of the series' staple features alongside the return of the home base mechanic, bonus experience you could give to units at the base, character biorhythm that subtly affected characters' hit and avoid stats throughout the story to simulate how they were feeling, the introduction of the more modern versions of many commonly seen skills, fully voiced CG movie cutscenes, and even the introduction of more shape-shifting characters like the Lagoos, who can transform into various animal species. Path of Radiance went on to spawn a sequel on the Nintendo Wii, the 10th entry in the series, Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn. Though this game begins with main characters Micaiah and Soth leading the ragtag Dawn Brigade, Ike still has a centerfold role in this game and does also return as a playable main character, albeit a little later on. This game brought back third-tier promotions, allowing characters a second-class upgrade after being promoted for the first time, combat advantages for having the higher ground, and even more Lagoos species in the new Wolf Lagoos. Next were Fire Emblem 11 and 12, the Fire Emblem 1 and 3 remakes featuring Marth that we discussed earlier. These games were released on the Nintendo DS and are Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon or Fire Emblem 11 and Fire Emblem New Mystery of the Emblem, Fire Emblem 12. Fire Emblem 11, Shadow Dragon, is a very faithful remake to Marth's original game and its FE3 Book 1 version, this time though adding in some new features like weapon forging, a Nintendo online wireless shop where you could buy exclusive weapons, unit lending to send your units to your friends' save files for a period of time, wireless multiplayer battling, class changing to be able to swap units into different classes, and brand new Gaiden chapters featuring some new characters. To access these Gaiden chapters though, you needed to have less than 15 units alive in your army, so you'd have to get a lot of units killed if you wanted to play through these different chapters. This was the first time for those of us here in the West that we ever got to experience playing Marth's story. Unfortunately though, at this point in time, the online features like multiplayer battling over the internet and wireless shop are no longer active due to Nintendo shutting down the Nintendo DS wireless servers. Because Intelligent Systems wanted the remake to be very faithful to the original, many fan-favorite features and quality of life improvements were missing from this entry, including now staple features like the rescue system. Even though we started getting Fire Emblem games in the West, starting with Fire Emblem 7, due to poor sales of some of the games leading up to Fire Emblem 12, New Mystery of the Emblem, and a lukewarm reception of Shadow Dragon, we in the West never received Fire Emblem 12, the remake of Fire Emblem 3. Thus, we never had a chance to play through the second half of Marth's story in English. But thanks to some incredibly dedicated Fire Emblem fans over at the Fire Emblem Translation Project, there is indeed a full fan translation that you can download and use to patch a Fire Emblem 12 ROM if you, happen to come across one of those. It's really well done. My friend said it's very well done. Yeah, that's what I meant. Like I said though, you will need a Fire Emblem 12 ROM to be able to use this translation patch, so keep that in mind. And I can't officially condone these methods. As for Fire Emblem 12's features, it brought us the first modern iteration of the My Unit or Avatar character that the player could customize to their liking, and who served a role in the story alongside Marth. The game also featured extra chapters that you could download for free, known as BS Fire Emblem, more advanced base functionality, which provided free items, weapons, temporary stat boosts, and support conversation levels at random, alongside the first ever iteration of casual mode, which allowed units who died in battle to return in the next battle and not stay dead permanently. Unfortunately, at this point in time, the older Fire Emblem titles, for example games like Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn with Ike, and even Shadow Dragon with Marth, have become rather expensive due to their increasing rarity and reinvigorated popularity, so it's not exactly very easy to get your hands on physical copies of them unless you're willing to spend, in some cases, over $100. There's always the sketchy ROM route, but keep in mind what I said before about Fire Emblem 7, 8, and 12 being available on the Wii U Virtual Console, or you could enter the series in the more modern era by picking up a copy of one of the 3DS Fire Emblem titles, which we'll discuss now. Fire Emblem 13 hit the Nintendo 3DS as Fire Emblem Awakening. This game could have been the last game in the entire franchise due to declining sales and other factors, but the developers pulled out all the stops and threw everything that they could at it. thankfully resulting in some of the first grandiose mainstream success and popularity that the Fire Emblem series has ever garnered. This game easily held its position as one of the top 10 3DS games to own for a long time, and featured Chrom, a very distant relative of Marth, and takes place on Marth's original continent thousands of years later, as well as featuring the player-customizable protagonist Robin. This game brought back the Gaiden-esque world map alongside the spawning enemies you could battle, a customizable main character avatar that was a bit more advanced than FE12's version, pairing characters and marriage from Fire Emblem 4, Genealogy also made a comeback with children units able to be recruited once their parents were together, new spot pass battles where you could battle AI-controlled versions of your friends' teams, a brand new pair-up mechanic where two characters could join together on the battlefield and assist each other in battle for tag team attacking or guarding, and it was also the first entry in the series to feature a lot of paid DLC, with more challenging maps, characters, and so on. Honestly, even though Awakening has some mixed feedback from some of the more old-school fans in the community, it's definitely an excellent title in the series to start off with and very easy to get into, so consider starting with this game if the previous options aren't available to you. This is a game that the developers felt may have been the last in the entire franchise, so there's definitely no lack of effort here. The amount of content and attention to detail is definitely masterful. In this game, you'll also be able to recruit all of the series' classic main characters like Marth, Ike, Roy, Eliwood, Hector, Lyn, Ephraim, Erica, Sigurd, Seliph, Leif, Soth, Micaiah, Alm and Celica via summoning their armies to the world map from the bonus box and beating them in battle. Just keep in mind though that they will be a little bit more generic looking due to their implementation and not being part of the main cast, but they're certainly in there if that's what you're looking for. Please note that Corrin is not in this game since Corrin's game came out after Awakening, and you also won't be able to utilize any Fire Emblem Amiibo for this title either, as that functionality started with the next entry in the series. After Awakening's smashing success, we received Fire Emblem 14, Fire Emblem Fates, known as Fire Emblem If in Japan. This game featured customizable main character Corrin as the lead protagonist, and the big choice of having to pick which side of the struggle to support: the Japanese-esque, moral good guy Hoshidans, and the Greco-Roman inspired badder guys, the Norians. Due to this choice, the game was split into two different physical copies: Fire Emblem Fates Birthright for choosing Hoshido, and Fire Emblem Fates Conquest for choosing Nor. The other choices in their paths, including a third path, Revelation, where the player chooses neither side, can be downloaded as paid DLC. Birthright is similar in gameplay and style to Fire Emblem Awakening, Sacred Stones, and Gaiden, and is a bit more open with a world map and numerous grinding opportunities, while Conquest is a bit more classic Fire Emblem in style, sending you directly from story chapter to story chapter, and having a bit of a higher difficulty in general. Though like I said, regardless of which physical version you get, you can download the other paths at $20 a piece. Fates also featured a brand new My Castle system where you could customize your home base, battle other friends' armies in their castle or your own, buy or earn character skills from other players, spend some time with characters in the private quarters, and also featured the return of the marriage and pair-up mechanic where children characters could be recruited after pairing up units in your army. It was also the first and only game in the franchise so far to offer another mode similar to casual mode, this version called Phoenix mode, where units that perished in battle simply came back to life at the beginning of the player's next turn. Though it destroyed any and all difficulty or challenge within the game, it offered extremely casual players a way of quickly playing through the story and not having to worry about much at all. And if it helped to get more people interested in Fire Emblem, I guess I'm all for it. I'll stick with classic mode myself though. Like Awakening, Fire Emblem Fates is also another great place to start off in the series, though it can be initially confusing as to which Fates game to pick up, but I would definitely say that Fire Emblem Fates Birthright is the easier of the two to just pick up and play, and is much more forgiving to new players, whereas Conquest is much more challenging and limited on purpose to be a more authentic and classic Fire Emblem experience, which may be a bit much for some new players. Marth, Ike, Lucina, and Robin are not in this game by default, but you can utilize their amiibo to summon them to your castle, and if you do this enough times, you can eventually challenge them to a battle and recruit them afterwards. Though keep in mind that they won't have support conversations with your other units and are a little bit more limited in terms of classes and equipment than some of your real characters will be. But if you're looking to have these characters with you in this game, then this is definitely the way to do so if you have the amiibo, and they're even better looking and less generic this time around than they were in Awakening. Second series amiibo, like Roy or Corrin, or even more recent amiibo, like Alm, Celica, Chrom, or Young Tiki, will not work in this way with Fire Emblem Fates, as they were created after its release and never added to the game. But the main character of Fates is also Corrin, so that amiibo wouldn't really make sense anyway, so it's only Roy, Alm, Celica, Young Tiki, and Chrom that get left out of this one. And finally, as of recording this video, the latest main series Fire Emblem title was in fact Fire Emblem Echoes Shadows of Valentia, the remake of Fire Emblem 2 that I touched upon earlier. This remake stayed very faithful to Gaiden, both to its boon as well as to its detriment in some areas, but was an incredibly polished, beautiful experience and an amazing game to play. It is currently one of the most easily acquirable games in this list, as is the most recent main series Fire Emblem release, and these games definitely tend to maintain and even increase in value over time, so grab this one if you've got a 3DS and don't own it already. It's definitely a great game, and you can check out this playlist here if you want to learn more about it. As for what else it brought to the table, it featured full voice acting for the first time in the series, a brand new first-person village exploration mode akin to point-and-click adventure games, third-person action RPG-esque dungeon crawling, the return of Gaiden's third-tier classes and other different mechanics, like magic costing HP, archers being able to attack from much larger ranges and even up close, and even had the modern addition of skills that you can unlock after using certain weapons enough in battle. It also had a brand new post-game dungeon that wasn't present in Gaiden, alongside a slew of DLC options as well. Once again, Marth, Ike, Lucina, and Robin are not in this game, but you can use their amiibo to summon phantom versions of them to the battlefield as sort of computer-controlled allies that will assist you for one turn. Even Roy's works this time around, however this is a much more limited way of experiencing these characters, as you don't keep them permanently, so please keep that in mind. The Alm and Celica amiibo will also unlock special in-game dungeons, and also allows you to summon extra illusory versions of your own Alm and Celica with their specific stats to the battlefield as well. The other newly released amiibo like Chrom and Young Tiki will have no specific character functionality since they're so new, but all amiibo in general will summon random illusory allies to help you in battle in this game, so in this game you can actually use any amiibo that you have. And the last game I'll mention on this list is the brand new Dynasty Warriors and Fire Emblem crossover title, Fire Emblem Warriors, for the Nintendo 3DS and Switch. In this game, you can hack and slash your way through swaths of enemy units, and you'll be able to play as series protagonists Chrom, Robin, Corrin, Lyn, Celica, and Marth, but no other protagonist characters like Ike or Roy will be playable. The developers have stated that they purposefully left them out in case they decide to make a sequel, so who knows, maybe we'll see them next time around. Any amiibo will also be compatible with this game, but will simply grant the player weapons and presents instead of character unlocks. And that catches us up to modern day as of the time that I'm making this video. So as a quick recap, Fire Emblem 1 had Marth, 2 had Alm and Celica, 3 was Marth again for his second story, 4 was Sigurd and Seliph, 5 was Leif, 6 was Roy, 7 was his father Eliwood with Hector and Lyn, 8 was Ephraim and Erica, 9 and 10 were Ike, as well as Micaiah and Soth in the sequel, 11 and 12 were once again both Marth as they were remakes of his original games, 13 was Chrom and Robin, 14 was Corrin, and now 15 was once again Alm and Celica, since it was another remake. If you tend to prefer the games with traversable world maps, then you're looking for Fire Emblem 2, Gaiden, 8, The Sacred Stones, 13, Awakening, 14, Fire Emblem Fate's Birthright and Revelation, and Fire Emblem 15, Fire Emblem Echoes, Shadows of Valentia. And you can play with other series main characters in Awakening without amiibo, Fates with amiibo, except for Roy, Corrin, Alm, Celica, Chrom, and Young Tiki, and Echoes very briefly for one turn with amiibo. Great starting points for the series are Fire Emblem 7, the aptly named Fire Emblem, Fire Emblem 8, The Sacred Stones, and any of the 3DS entries, with Fire Emblem 13, Awakening, as perhaps the game that overall I would recommend that you start with the most. And if you're looking for a more casual experience and you don't like the idea that your units can permanently die, you can play Fire Emblem 12, New Mystery of the Emblem, Fire Emblem 13, Awakening, 14, Fates, and 15, Echoes, and utilize the casual mode that they offer, where units who die in battle will return once that chapter is over. Whew. I know that was a lot of information to pump into your brain if you're just beginning to peek into the franchise, but hopefully this has helped to shed some light on things for you, and perhaps narrow down your search for which Fire Emblem title to try out. Or at least I hope it's given you some ideas as to which games in the series you may want to pick up and try if you're looking for certain characters or certain experiences. Fire Emblem is an incredible franchise, and I hope you go on to love it as much as I and many others do. I hope you enjoyed this not-so-quick dive into the Fire Emblem series with me. If you did, please do me a solid and slash the like button below the video, and also be sure to leave me a comment in the comment section down below, and let me know where you started in the franchise or where you're thinking of starting. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you find Fire Emblem interesting, whether you're a casual or hardcore fan, also make sure to get subscribed to see more content like this, and maybe even learn more about the franchise through some of our videos. We also put out some other types of content, like nostalgia-filled rides back into the GBA era with some of our favorite old games, so perhaps that might appeal to you as well. Make sure that you also click the notification bell too, so you don't miss any of our new videos, as YouTube has been rather mean lately about pushing videos to sub boxes, and that's apparently working as planned for them, so yeah. Also a big shout out to all of our fantastic patrons who help to keep this channel alive and producing more content as often as we do. You can check out our Patreon as well as the rewards and incentives for joining right here. For any news and updates, also make sure to follow us on Twitter at Lucky Creek Gaming. And I'll see you all next time.